curious. There. She followed him and soon found herself falling a very deep hole into a strange place called Curious Conversation. Curious Conversation. Nowadays, there are still...
Okay, welcome to Curious Conversations. I want to say this is episode 12, but this is recording number 12. I don't know if it's going to come out as the 12th one, but it's in season 2. And today we have 3 new friends. Some I'm just meeting today in this Zoom meeting right now. And a few weeks ago now, I put a call out very curiously and very tentatively with a lot of Googling on how to phrase this correctly, because it's an area that I'm not very traversed in, that I haven't spent a lot of time in. And the words I ended up choosing was, hey, has anyone got any connections in the disability community? And I sat very at the edge of my seat, hoping that I'm not going to trigger anyone and I haven't said the wrong thing. And hopefully someone reached out to me who was Pia. And Pia had reached out and said she's very passionate about this and would love to help in any way possible. And there was actually another reason. It wasn't even for the podcast, I think, originally. It was for something else. Do you remember, Pia, before I continue to introduce everyone else, what I was actually wanting to do this for?
I think it was for a series of artwork in a book.
Yes, actually. Yes, it
Yeah.
is. So I've got a book coming out. We can talk about that later. But I wanted to have the ability to reference someone with permission, so I wasn't stereotyping. I was actually going, this is my one person that I'm gonna reference. But yes, Pia helped, and we just were like, oh, actually we could do a podcast. We could actually have this conversation, and I could actually learn in these places that I feel quite tentative in and a bit reserved. And I can actually have a conversation and learn and put it on a platform where others can and learn as well. And you had mentioned Julia, who is also someone that I had met a few years ago now. I was assisting at your spiral prac training, and we got a bit of time. We actually traveled from Byron to Sydney together, which was nice to spend some time together. And you've also introduced me to Samantha, who is a friend of yours, and you've introduced me to someone new, and I'm really excited to be able to learn about yourself and what you have to share within this topic. So hello everyone. I would like to just go in popcorn style. Maybe I'll start with Pia, actually, just because I've given you the starting introduction. If you just want to introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit where you're from and where you fit, or where you include yourself on this spectrum, is this the right word? This is going to be all where it's at, of the disability community.
Sure. Hi, my name is Pia. I am originally from Sydney. I'm currently living in and recording from Zurich, Switzerland. I relocated here a couple of years back. Where I fit within the disability community, or the chronic illness community, or however it is framed. And this is actually something that we talked about in our initial kind of exchange as well, is that I have endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome. Both are diseases that affect the areas in and around the womb space, although endometriosis is a little bit more complex than that. And coming up to around 6 or 7 years ago now, I essentially had a mini death. My whole life changed and ended in the way that I knew it, because I became extremely ill to the point where I could no longer work, could no longer study, could no longer function in any way that I had been doing so beforehand. And I essentially just fell into institutionalized medicine to try and fix what was wrong. And it was a few years of back and forth and no diagnosis and not knowing what was actually wrong. I was just suffering from really intense pain, and really intense bleeding. A lot of which I was told was normal from a lot of doctors. So I experienced a lot of gaslighting and a lot of internal confusion that left me in a worse space than I was when I had initially fallen very ill. And that was kind of my catalyzing moment where I decided, well, hey, I need to actually take the reins here, because if I don't, then I don't know what's going to become of me. And I then really started diving deep into personal development, into spirituality, and looking at what was happening to me within my body in a holistic way. And through these types of new experiences and experimenting, I guess, also with different modalities and different forms of more Eastern medicine, I was able to come to a space of healing. But that being said, I also, within the more spiritual and self-development spaces, found there to be a lot of gaslighting too. And that really pushed me to change my life, and also really made me realize what my life's purpose is, which is to help people who identify as or who live with chronic illness or disability to really empower themselves and to get away from this passive kind of position that we're almost institutionalized into just taking and to just empower people to, despite what might be physically or mentally or whatever not functioning in the ways that we're told is supposed to be right or normal, to just be themselves and to find power and beauty within that, and also to find a space in which they can be themselves and heal. So at the moment, that's the sphere that I'm in, and I'm really passionate about helping people within these communities really just empower themselves and to find a space where they feel safe, comfortable, seen, and respected within the Muggle world, and also within the spiritual world that we also inhabit.
Yeah. Epic. All right, you've touched on so many things I already want to discuss, but I've got to make it around this Zoom square first. But thank you so much for this very passionate share. I feel how passionate you are about what we're going to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Samantha, would you like to go next?
Sure. By the way, you can call me Sami if you wish to.
Sami, cool, awesome.
So I'm from I'm living in North Queensland at the moment. Originally, I'm from England. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 5. I've had it my whole life, but I was 5 in 1987, I have to just say. And that was there's a time when children weren't really being easily seen and diagnosed with autoimmune conditions at the time. So by the time I was 10, I was very sick from being in the medical industry. As Pia said, there's a lot of gaslighting. There's a lot of, when you're a devalued or disabled person as well, it's sort of, there's an attitude of, well, this is your lot, so kind of lump it. So by the time I was 10, I was very sick. My mom took me to a naturopath, and I kind of knew already that I wanted to work in medicine from a very young age, but nothing was really jiving with me as far as I kind of thought I wanted to be a doctor and then a physiotherapist. But the minute I met this naturopath, fireworks went off, and I just was like, this is where I need to be. This makes so much sense as a healing modality for the body, where it's holistic and the power is given back to the patient, because one of the pillars of naturopathy is you teach the patient how to be a healer or heal themselves. But when I was 15 and I could leave school, I did, and I went to a college conjunct clinic that was actually run by the naturopath that I saw when I was 10. I became a naturopath, and I was there for almost 12 years. So my journey with rheumatoid arthritis is very intrinsically linked with my journey of healing, my journey of my purpose, much like Pia said, it becomes a part, you know, it's a part of you. And I think it's really important to lean into that, because that perfectionist or that kind of shadow that we have ingrained in our society and as individuals of being productive, being perfect, not being in the way or a burden, is it's actually where we're most whole. Leaning into our brokenness is where we're actually, I'm not really articulating that well, but where we're broken is what inherently can lead us to our wholeness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. So yeah, then when I was 18, I had my hips replaced. I've had quite a few. I've had those 2 surgeries, and I've had a foot fusion surgery. So even though those things have helped me, they've also brought about different levels of disability in my life, which in turn kind of mean that you have to navigate a society that only has a certain kind of leeway when it comes to making space for that, which is, I guess, something we'll probably talk about more.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for your share, Sami. Yeah, I feel also there's so much to unpack there. And again, like I am appreciating this now, just hearing both your just small introductions of how different the journey is already. And again, that there's a spectrum that we're speaking of right now. So I really appreciate you showing up and being able to tell your part among us that we can converse in. So thank you.
Thank you.
Julia.
Thank you. Wow, I feel so honored to be here. This is already so powerful. I would say my journey is a little bit different. It might have started, though, we're almost hitting the 10-year mark. I was struggling with binge eating and a slew of mental health issues like depression, addiction, and more so on that line. And not long after, maybe when I was 18, I was super young, found that that therapy and various forms of treatment weren't working for me, and I sought a spiritual solution. So it was something that came to me at a young age, which I'm really grateful for. But with that also came a slew of health issues. So though I didn't struggle with a physical disability, I had also endometriosis like Pia. I had chronic back pain, really a lot of trouble sleeping at night, different things happening with my energy levels. And I just found my whole body was in fight or flight all the time. And so that just, kept me on a certain level where I couldn't rest. And so that's really what took me deeper into my healing journey, where I found the spiral, the emotional clearing work that we do. I've done a number of medicine ceremonies like ayahuasca, various traditional sweat lodges. I went deeper into my nutrition and movement as well as part of my physical healing. And then kind of by trial and error, I kind of went back to study all of those that I've used, and, from psychedelics all the way up to the emotional clearing world and nutrition in between. I see it all as part of a big picture of just the many facets and how really distinct and unique each and every person is. And there's no one solution fits all, which I feel is so fitting to this conversation. And at the same time, like Sam was saying, those wounds that we have can definitely open up new worlds of possibility in our lives. So, I'm grateful to be here. Thanks, Paisley, for starting this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm brimming with questions right now. And I'm so, there's a part of me, like I mentioned beforehand, before we started it, we'll call it off air, like I feel a bit vulnerable in conducting this, but also confident. And I'm sure both will come across throughout it. And again, like such a new space for me and a new perspective for myself to absorb, to integrate into my life, to be more inclusive and to have a wider perspective on different human experiences. And I'm sort of, I conduct this podcast where I don't really put in a lot of research to what's anyone I talk to, because I find it, I find possibly it's maybe more relatable to people that are listening in a manner that maybe they don't have the same, like they don't have an understanding like myself. And if I, not to say I'm stupid, but to say something like I'm someone that is willing to show up in a space of unknowing, I didn't want to come and pretend like I could spitfire a whole bunch of facts about things that I'm learning from you three. So I'm really honored and grateful that you three have shown up and willing to participate in this with me. So thank you.
Thank you for making the space for a conversation like this.
So the common thread that I first have sort of noticed is that you all have found different ways of what society would call alternative healing, Eastern healing rather than Western. And I'm sure there's also, it's sounds like inevitable that there's certain parts of Western medicine that you still have to participate. But I am curious to hear from each of you, and we can just popcorn this, is what are you finding different? Like, what is the reason to go outside of all of us, to my understanding, born and raised in Western society? What makes you go, I'm going to also suss out some kind of Eastern philosophy and healing and medicine?
Well, there's a few different forks in the road I could probably pick out there. One being that part of the collective shadow that I mentioned before has a lot to do with like puritanicism and the kind of oppression that, I'm going to speak from a Christian society because that's what I was raised in, the way that a Christian society controlled the narrative around disabled people and medicine. Sadly, it does still control that area. There's that fear, I suppose, that or that collective shadow, even in medical practitioners that I mentioned, where they're sort of dismissive. You're still devalued because you don't contribute to, capitalist society, which in, thousands of years ago was the church conjunct the king. You paid your taxes. If you were anything outside of, someone that could work the fields or be a soldier, you were devalued. So these shadows are still showing up in our collective. But I think we're having really interesting conversations where we're so desperate to heal that, which is why I guess we're here today with you, Paisley.
Yes.
So being devalued, even in the medical system, definitely makes you wish to search for something more. And alternative therapies, they're kind of outside of that circle. And there's definitely a renegade element to even Western holistic medicine, which is, mostly what naturopathy is built from. It's like that classical Greek Hippocratic doctor of nature. So, I think the desire to be empowered once again and to have that choice of what you're going to use in medicine, to feel like like most doctors do not explain to you really what's going on in your body. Most of my clients come to me, they want to know, they have so many questions. And putting the power back in their court just changes them. It makes them relate to their illness or whatever they're going through in a different way, which facilitates, I think, a huge portion of the healing, of course.
Mm-hmm.
See, I think I covered mostly what I wanted to say there, unless you can think of anything you want me to expand.
So just to recap on what I've heard is that as Western society is very much indoctrinated and conditioned through Christianity, and that in the earlier times of, I'm assuming you're speaking from early England times, is the king would sort of, if you weren't someone that could work or be a soldier, then you weren't of value to society, and that is still in the shadow collective of Western society now, and that by going through into Eastern philosophy and medicine there is a deeper connection in actually attaining the knowledge for yourself, rather than doctors and nurses and whoever being the gatekeepers of knowledge within these different diagnoses.
Yeah, but I'd like to clarify, obviously not all doctors and nurses feel
Yes,
that
of
way.
course.
Well, I definitely work with a lot of them. And also to clarify, that what I'm talking about is capitalism, basically, and how late stage capitalism has brought us to this place. So
Yes.
we're corporations now. We're not like the church and the king, but we're kind of like the church incorporated and the king incorporated, So it's a different sense, but there's those same shadows.
It's the evolution of that origin is where we're at.
Exactly.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I again, like that, just alone, Christianity and that indoctrination there, that's already one ding.
Exactly. If you're a sick person, like it was like holy oil was put on you, you weren't given the healing, even though they had skills there. Those people with those skills were burned or hanged at the stake, hanged. They were like, it was a control thing, control the narrative and devalue those people. People with mental health disability, they were, there was a demon inside them. It was a vicious kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Exorcism. They would kill people. So these people were kind of left to die if you were sick, if you were disabled. And so the shadow, plays it well. We see that with people being told, well, you can't contribute to society, so you're a burden on society, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of how it works through.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Thank you for hearing that so openly, because I know it's kind of crunchy. It's a hard one.
Yeah, well, I'm here to be crunchy, clunky, awkward, and to smooth it out until we're all on the same plane. Yeah. So thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I really relate to that. The whole productivity, what are you giving? What are you making? How much money are you making? How much money are you spending? These things are given such inherent value in the societies that we live in that it's really, really hard. And I think, at least from my personal perspective, I was healthy. I was good. I was doing all the things I was supposed to be doing. I was working. I was productive. I was spending money. I was making money. I was doing all that. And then, in my mid to late 20s, it kind of just all stopped. And I think from that perspective, it's really interesting to see how I was treated beforehand versus how I was treated afterwards. And that really rings true. But I think, at least for me, part of the reason, to go back to the question you were asking initially, Paisley, that I guess decided to take a left from just purely being in this institutionalized Western medical system was just the idea that, when you look outside of that paradigm, there is an absolute acknowledgement that there's a link between the mind and the body, that there is more to it than just looking at one particular part of your body. With endometriosis, which was the illness that I battled with the most, there are symptoms that affect a whole bunch of systems within your body, but it's also only viewed as a gynecological issue. So when they don't see something that's purely gynecological, then you're sent and shipped off to a whole bunch of different doctors that focus on the stomach, doctors that focus on nerves, rheumatologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. You're kind of just like a ping pong ball that's just being like batted off somewhere else, because as Julia was saying before, there is this idea that it's a one size fits all solution for every single person that experiences whatever given illness or diagnosis that they are living within. And I think that different philosophies and different schools of medicine outside of Western medicine actually look at things in a much more holistic way and acknowledge that, yeah, maybe past trauma or ancestral patterning, or, you know, something that's going on within the mental space might also be working in conjunction with whatever is happening within the body. And having that perspective is also really, really empowering as the patient, as opposed to just being told, we don't really know what's wrong with you, we're going to palm you off to the next guy. And after a while, you've seen every doctor that you could have seen, and then you're just treated like you're crazy. And that, at least for me, was something that was really, really difficult to grapple with, because I knew that I was feeling such intense physical pain, but I was being told that it was all in my head. And then that created a whole slew of other problems. So finding that there were actually different ways of looking at illness, didn't matter which illness, but just illness in and of itself, was super, super empowering.
Yeah, epic. So there's something here that I'm hearing over and over of, that through Eastern medicine is that it's not just looking at like, this is the issue and this is all it can be, you know, rather than going, let's look over here and see what is surrounding it, to see if there's another way into this thing or around it that actually can unravel this whatever it is that each person is currently moving through, or journeying with. Yeah. Julia, I feel like you have something to say right off the back of that.
I'll add just very basic, like, you know, at a very basic fundamental level, there's a few things happening that I feel is contributing to like this frustration that's brewing amongst a lot of people. I feel that, you know, Western medicine or allopathic medicine is excellent when you have an acute injury. If I break my arm, if I have a benign tumor that needs to be removed, you know, in terms of responding to an acute problem, it's excellent. There's so many new technologies. There's so many excellent, you know, doctors out there who are trained very well to you know, to do certain things. And chronic illness, and I can't speak for having disability, but chronic illness is something that is a multifaceted thing, like kind of what we're suggesting. And a lot of the times what will happen is, you know, there's the temptation for a doctor to give you a solution up front. And what that might look like is, here's a medication, here's an option for surgery, here is XYZ. And it depends like I'm a results oriented person, but it depends what you see as a result that you're happy with. Because if I had a cardiovascular issue and I was put on a high blood pressure medication, for some people, that's cool for them. That's what they would like to see. But for someone like me, I'm more of, I'd not like to experience being on medication for the rest of my life. I'm curious what else I can find that will help me. So for example, when I went to the doctor and I said, you know, I'm struggling with extreme period pain every single month, the only solution that I was suggested was a number of surgeries or birth control. And birth control would impact my depression. So I eventually said no. And that's when I went to look for an alternative method. Does that not mean that Western medicine, you know, still plays a huge role in what we do? And I just find that the structure isn't always beneficial for people with chronic illness. And I think what we're picking up on is the way that the system is structured is that doctors, nurses, and, you know, if you have a public healthcare system, which I do in Canada, they're so overworked and underpaid, especially our nurses, that they don't actually have the time to give you when they're tending to hundreds of patients every single day. And so that unique, like one-to-one care where you're seen, heard, valued, and felt, I feel is like such a huge component of what people are looking for that's not being met in the healthcare system.
Yeah, that's a very important thing to bring up, is that, our Western culture of medicine and our health services are just to the brim in overflow and understaffed, that it's hard, you know, to actually be present and patient with someone. I know even just myself, for someone, sometimes some days I'm just stacked with clients, and I'm like, I like to go, if I have an hour session, it's like I usually go over if we're on something good, but sometimes there's times where it's like, sorry, your hour's over, I gotta go, you know. And I could just imagine what it's like to be serving hundreds of people a day rather than my maximum 10 people a day or whatever it is, you know. And a piece I feel to share, just to, I guess, curiosity of everyone here, and maybe to, as someone that the listeners will probably relate to most with me as the facilitator, is right now, over the last year, I've been having a problem with passing urine. Like my flow has just gone down and down and down, to the point where I went and seen a urologist, and this first guy, he's like, I think your bladder head is, the neck of it is closing down and urine can't actually get through it. So he gave me this medicine to take to see if it is that. And it helped a little bit. And then I ran out of the medicine. It was a whole process to try and get back with them. I ended up having to see someone else. I went and seen another urologist, and they're like, oh, if that helped, it's definitely that. It's 100% that. And I was like, but are you sure? And he's like, yeah, it's that. And like, so your three options are, you can either take this tablet every day for the rest of your life, which stopped me from, I can't ejaculate anymore, because what it does is it keeps the bladder neck open. And whereas someone that owns a cock, when you ejaculate, it sends your body into spasm and the bladder neck does close, and that's what makes the ejaculation go forward. But if mine is stuck open, it actually goes back into the bladder, and later on I urinate it out. So he's like, you can either take this every day, which means I'll have to take a medicine every day and there's no ejaculation, or you can get a bladder incision, which means it's sort of like the equivalent of a vasectomy in a way, where I will never ejaculate again. Or you can just continue the way you are, struggle to piss, and you will have strokes earlier in your life. These are your three options. And I was devastated. I'm like, I am sure there's got to be something else. There's got to be some kind of acupuncture. There's got to be something that can help me loosen this muscle that's contracting, right? And he's like, no, it's like just a thing. You are one in very few people that get this. And then I went and got a urethrogram, where they stick a thing up my urethra. Is that what they call it? And it's like a camera from the outside, sort of like like an X-ray, but not. And essentially, because I wanted to check if there was actually like a kink in the pipes, you know, and there was. And I went back to him, and he's like, I still think it's the bladder neck. I'm like, I have proof that something else is going on. So I'm gonna go get a surgery with a camera to go up there and check if it's that, get that fixed, see if it's also the bladder thing. And if it is that, I'm going to like somewhere else to see if I have other options, because I'm just determined to not take. I'm grateful that this medicine is there as an option because it hurts for me to pass urine, and it just takes forever. But yeah, I'm glad that that's there as an option, but it's just not what I'm wanting to go with right now. And this is what I'm sort of hearing as a thread between all of you is that, okay, there's been this diagnosis and they've given me these options, but I want to see what else is available. So yes, Pia.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And thanks for, sorry that you're going through that, because that sounds horrible. I just want to add on to something that I'm also kind of hearing, and at least from my personal experience, I feel to be true when it comes to these like one size fits all diagnoses and also the treatments that are offered. When you go into a space with a doctor and you are curious and also quite informed, which a lot of people in the chronic illness community and in the disability community end up being, we end up being experts on the things that we are diagnosed on. Because often, first of all, you find that a whole bunch of doctors will say pretty much the same thing, but with some slight discrepancies that don't make any sense, which is quite confusing. But and also really telling of the fact that as much as these, I respect doctors, I respect nurses, they've studied for ages, you know, their jobs are difficult, etc. But it just goes to show that no one is an absolute expert on anything. And that second of all, it ends up almost being a battle of ego and a battle of will. And that's something that I've experienced a lot with doctors, both in Australia and in Switzerland. And it's been a really difficult thing to navigate, because it's like, well, hey, I live in this body and I know that this is wrong. And I've read and seen anecdotal and also often scientific evidence that A, B, and C might work. And I'm just being told that, no, that's not true. You're not a doctor. You have no idea what's going on. That is something that's really confronting and really difficult, but also something that I think a lot of us deal with on the daily. So being able to exit that space, even though I'm the first to admit that it has helped me, and I've had surgery. I was told for years that I couldn't have children, and I just had a child 6 months ago after having a surgery with a successful and great, and thank you, and a doctor that I trusted and that I vetted, and I asked a whole bunch of questions that he had never been asked before, that was able to help. So I believe it's absolutely possible, but it takes so much time to also navigate a system that is kind of set up to really privilege voices that have no lived experience. And I think that that's kind of the issue. Maybe your urologist probably never had an issue with the bladder. They've read up about it and know from books what they can and should do. But if that doesn't work for you, then instead of saying, oh, hey, let's try and find a solution together, they'll often just be like, no, sorry, there is no solution. It's just what I've offered. Take it or leave it.
That's what I said. I was like, hey, what do you know about any kind of Eastern medicine? I know this is opposite to your work and means I would see someone else. But I was like, even acupuncture, what do you know? And he's just like, doesn't work. I was like, all right, whatever. So I'm sure, you know, for me, this one experience of being like, oh, I'm sure you have all faced endless amount of times, which, you know, I feel a lot of empathy for, because I left there. I cried in front of him. I cried in my car, and then I went and looked for solutions, you know? So I'm sure that's something you've all experienced in your own way multiple times. So one thing I feel like to really clarify right now throughout this conversation is, before we continue to move forward in these tendrils that I have so many questions for, is maybe if you all or one person wants to maybe give us their own definition, or if there is a concrete definition between disability and chronic illness.
Well, I'm not sure if there is a concrete definition. I would say that it depends on if your chronic illness does impact your life in any way that you can't live it the way that you want to, then that's a disability. And most chronic illnesses do that. So, you know, our society is full of people that are kind of neglected in this way. And I also like something that I read the other day that said, please don't like use the phrase special needs when we're referring to people with disabilities, because it makes them, it sounds like they're a burden, right? Like they have special extra needs, whereas really, you know, their disability just means they can't maybe do the things that they need to do every day to live the life that they want. And so asking for help and support to do that in a community should be quite easy. And it kind of comes back to something Pia said that I wanted to touch on, and your experience, Paisley, is that people with chronic illness and disability, if it ties together, they do become experts on their illness, and then they become so empathetic, so understanding about holding space for others that are going through healing journeys. You know, back in the day, they would be the witch doctors, the shamans, the healers of the community, because they were recognized for having that journey. And so, you know, sort of in that way. So Pia, Julia, Paisley, we're witch doctors, we're healers.
We are. Yeah, I love to, you know, when you actually mentioned that in like certain books that I've read or documentaries that I've watched, you know, a lot of what I've learnt is like, myself on my queer journey, is that the witch doctors, the shamans, whoever is the sort of the healer of the community has usually been trans and or some place on the queer spectrum. And as you say this now, I've usually, without even putting the pieces together, have noticed that there's been some kind of disability involved with their role. And it's that empathy piece to understand and be able to hold the space. And, you know, because that was the whole thing around trans, is to be able to hold the experience of each gender or each sex, in the community. And yeah, to, if anyone comes with any kind of illness to see the witch doctor, they're like, yeah, I feel you.
Navigating the betwixt. Life, death, rebirth, the betwixt of it all.
Yeah, no, and in a lot of different cultures, especially like in Latin America, I'm Chilean by heritage. I know that a lot of like shamans and witch doctors, etc., in Latin America, they would be, by Western terms, like severely mentally ill or viewed in that way. And it's the same as like a lot of shamans are what we would consider to be schizophrenic.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's navigating worlds. It's looking at things through a different paradigm, through a different filter. You know, it's just a really interesting thing to see how, the Western lens that's put on things really affects the way that we process them and view them, especially when we're living in that very context. So it's really interesting.
Oh my God, every time everyone shares something, I have like two questions that I want to ask that lead us in two different ways, and it's very hard to pick. So what I think I'm going to go for now is, you know, I've learned again through like queer experience and a lot of through last year's surgence of the very much needed publicity of the Black Lives Matters movement and all that, the education that came through there. I'm very curious around what your community is like around, or even your own lived experiences of being physically disabled versus like, I guess, able passing. I don't know what the right terminology would be, but what that is for each of you, what that is, and how that is among the community yourself, like overarching society judgments or non-judgments versus within the community. Is there kind of discrepancies in that area or any kind of hierarchy? I don't know, whatever you feel to share in there.
I feel like I need to think a minute for that one.
Yeah, thinking space is definitely welcome.
Because there's definitely that. There's definitely a hierarchy. There's definitely a judgment of like, oh, well, you're not in a wheelchair. So, but that doesn't mean I don't always need a wheelchair. going to, as an example of just how wild it is, the high school I went to had a disabled toilet that was up a flight of stairs, like half a flight of stairs, and you had to turn a key to get into it. And when they gave me the key to this toilet, it was like they were giving me the Holy Grail or something. So the judgment, the misunderstanding, and the not really wanting to meet you halfway is definitely a big thing. I mean,
Yes.
that was a long time ago. Things are starting to change a bit, I think. I live in a smallish town in North Queensland, and
Yes.
I feel like it is changing where I am in my community. Black Lives Matter just sparked so many good conversations around, intersectionality and what we do to support community. So did COVID, does anyone else have anything to add to that? I feel like there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
About that.
Big topic. I mean, I think, just, I guess, to put a term to what you were asking before, Paisley, is I guess the easiest way to describe it for me is like invisible illness. Like when I was at the height of my endometriosis, I was the thinnest I had ever been. I was unable to eat because it was affecting my bowels. Endometriosis, just for anybody that doesn't know, is, just as a quick description, is an illness in which, and they're not sure whether it is an autoimmune illness or there's not really been enough research done into it, but it's an illness in which cells very similar to the tissue that you bleed out when you have your period, so similar to that, they grow outside of the womb space. It's also been found in men, it's been found in little boys, it's been found in people's eyes, it's been found in their lungs, it's been found in their brains, on their nerves, etc. But it is viewed as a disease that mainly affects the womb space. But what happens is that essentially these cells respond to the same hormonal changes that you go through during your moon cycle, and you essentially bleed and have lesions growing inside your body, but that blood has nowhere to go, has nowhere to exit, because it's just inside the pelvic cavity or wherever else it is. So I was living with an illness that was affecting my bowels, my urethra, pretty much my whole pelvic bowl space, and outside of my womb. I looked pregnant a lot of the time. I couldn't really leave the house a lot of the time. I was super heavily medicated on like painkillers. I was on opiates for like 3 years, actually, because that was the only thing that was even slightly touching the pain that I had. But according to everybody that didn't really know what was happening with me, I was looking great and looking really beautiful and fitting into these small clothes. And when I did go out, when I could muster the energy to, and when I was doing things that I was, I guess, trying to hold on to have some semblance of a life, I was receiving like so much positive feedback that it was also such a mind fuck, and no one really understood that after going out for 3 hours and having one drink, that I would be completely just unable to function for the next 5 days as a result of that. So my close-knit community was a lot more understanding, but I also had this feeling, and I don't know if this was just me projecting or whether it was kind of true, that I was a massive burden on the people around me because I was just not able to really function. And then externally, there was kind of this, oh yeah, you're sick, but you look great. So it was just like a lot of mixed messaging. And then from the more personal development spiritual community, it was really strange. I just received a whole bunch of unsolicited advice about things that I was, not asking for. And I felt really belittled and also really excluded in a lot of senses, because the message that I was getting was that I'd called this in.
Yes. Yes.
And
that's a
that
big
was
one I want to look at too.
really, really, really hard.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah.
I'll add to this too. Also thank you, Pia, for sharing. Like, that's huge. And I really see you in that. And I mean, even you, Paisley, might remember this. I shared like privilege is so different across the board. Like, I can't compare you know, my chronic illness to Black Lives Matter. It's just a different, you know, we as 4 white people on the screen have so many privileges.
Yes.
You know, but I think that what we're all alluding to is like, so many people have blind spots. We all have blind spots. So if I don't have a lived experience living something, then I can't, and I mean, I can try to tell someone how they could live their life, but it's not going to land, and it's not going to actually allow the healing that needs to happen, or allow a common space to be there where 2 people can come together and have a healing experience. So I think what we're all sharing is just like in that pain of feeling misunderstood, you know. Sometimes what's also really helpful is having a space where you can be seen and heard. Sometimes what's helpful is talking to someone who's had that lived experience, who can share with you what worked for them. Sometimes it's, you know, doing your own research on your body. But I think that what ultimately, you know, how does society see chronic illness? Yeah, I do. And I feel like this is also reflected in how I saw my chronic illness, which was, why is this showing up? I want to get rid of it. And that this is a burden. And oh my goodness, when I'm stuck in the bathtub all day, as opposed to I can't go to the corporate office and live my life, I don't want to look at what's there for me, or, you know, what I could do better and stuff like that. I just want to freaking charge and go do my thing and be a, you know, this all-star, whatever I was trying to be back then, was kind of how I saw the things happening to me. And it was being reflected in, you know, what society praises as well, which is like, just keep going, keep working hard, you know, kind of put a Band-Aid on it and just go. And it didn't allow that space to really slow down and to be like, okay, what could your body possibly be, you know, trying to share with you? Or, you know, what else could we explore together? So I think just at a basic level, you know, that's kind of where I see chronic illness kind of playing into the realm.
Yeah, this struck a big nerve in me, something Pia said there, and like what you've continued to elaborate on is like, you know, coming into this, and a big part of my intention here is this conversation around inclusivity, and like for people looking to be more inclusive, and especially in the circles that we run in, people that in embodiment or in spirituality or personal development and these different areas, is, I know for myself, is that disability and chronic illness has been a bit more in the shadows for me, you know. And, you know, as we all know, looking at our shadows can be confronting, you know, and just even saying that right now is like, I don't know how that lands in any of your 3 world of like, that disability and chronic illness is shadow work for me, you know, that again, it sort of takes me back to Sami saying like, not that it's not appropriate to say someone with special needs, you know, that, and that's what I feel like I'm saying right now is like, my shadow work is like, oh, there's like over here, you know, I don't like that's a lived reality for me, but I have to face it, you know. And a thing like where Pia, you're saying like, to society's standards on the outside, you looked, you know, that people oh, you look wonderful, you know, and in the inside you're feeling completely the opposite. And like, I just as you're saying, I'm like, oh fuck, how many times have I been that person, you know? And what is the I was gonna say, what is the solution? But I know, you know, is just more like emotional attention to people, you know, like, how are you feeling, rather than like, oh, you look amazing, you know. It's like, what's on the inside that's going on right now, rather than going straight for the, and I am quite guilty of that in certain ways. Like, and I know my intention is great, you know, if like I see someone and I'm like, oh my God, your hair looks lovely today, you know, as just a little icebreaker or whatever, but just knowing that sometimes that can also just not be the right thing is a great awareness for you to give to me right now. And yeah, I would love to actually move into that how that feels for each of you around seeing these conversations happen around being inclusive, and knowing that it is really beautiful that people are paying more attention to people of color, to the BIPOC community, to queer and trans community, but maybe not, I don't know in your experience, but just my personal experience is I haven't looked at this area, and I'm wondering where that feels for you. Do you feel included in the inclusive conversation?
I can start. And by the way, Paisley, I'm so proud of you. You are diving into conversations that are uncomfortable, and I just feel like even just seeing that and witnessing that is so healing in and of itself. So thank you.
100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was interesting because yesterday I was having lunch with a girlfriend who's in the addiction space with me, and that's where my story began. So I'll start with that. But she said that with COVID, she was kind of like, did you know that if you today want to check into a detox facility, you have to get a negative COVID test? And to me, that kind of just showed how out of tune policymakers are with people who have a lived experience of addiction. Because for someone to walk into a detox center, it takes so much effort. And to put even a slight barrier to entry for them to come and walk into a detox center, they won't go. They won't go. Like I would say 90% of people won't go unless it's a life or death situation, which sometimes it is a life or death situation. And ironically, what's happening now with COVID is that our addiction rates are going through the roof. People are dying of suicide, heroin, fentanyl overdoses, including a friend of mine last year. And it's just it's really interesting to see the ripples and the effects of policy that are lacking that empathy and inclusivity. So even, you know, we're talking in this micro level of how we're all feeling and shadow work and everything, and then to add the political kind of sphere to it really gives us this whole new dimension. And then I think, you know, going back to the shadow work, and it's really interesting, is that when I'm able to hold space for, you know, for myself, in the sense where when I have my period, my body says, slow the heck down, what do you need? And the more that I can go into those spaces of, you know, what is my body saying to me in this moment, I will be able to connect to what other people are going through at that level as well. So yeah, eventually seeing it as shadow work is really interesting. It's something I've never really considered before. But also it allows maybe for a deeper conversation of how do I meet someone who might be moving through this challenge. And often I find just the question of, how are you? What's moving in your life? Is just such an easy question. You know, how is your health? You know, you look amazing. Is that also reflected with what you're moving through on the inside? You know, and it just adds that extra layer of perspective. And I feel like even this is a time to listen, you know, like all that stuff was happening last year with the movement. Something in my heart just said, Julia, shut the fuck up and listen, you know, because we want to speak, we want to be heard and all that stuff. But I find this is a time for me personally to really listen to lived experiences and see how I can be a part of the bigger healing picture.
Yeah, beautiful. And thank you for that reframe around, you look beautiful, how are you feeling on the inside? Yeah. Does that reflect inwards? Yeah. Thank
it's
you.
always nice to be told that you look good. So
it is. No, it is. But I think it, like, framing it in that way is really beautiful and also really powerful, because I think, at least in my experience of being someone who was disabled by chronic illness, at least for a period of time, I felt like answering that question honestly was not really an option. It was just adding to that story of me being a burden. And when people were asking me, and I also felt this energy around it of like, oh no, what's she going to say now that she feels like shit again? You know, it was just this kind of thing where it's almost just like a, you know, like in Australia, we're super like, hey, how you going? And the answer that you're supposed to say is like, oh, good, thanks. And you? It was just kind of just that constantly, because it just felt so difficult. But I think one thing that you said before, Julia, when you were talking about intersectionality and inclusivity, that I want to just draw upon, especially in the realm of gynecological diseases, especially endometriosis, that I have a couple really dear friends who are trans men who have endometriosis as well, and they are absolutely excluded from the conversation, even though it's become something that's a bit more in the forefront of what's going on in women's medicine at the moment. Like there are articles and documentaries and a lot of things going on in terms of more visibility when it comes to endometriosis, at least, but there is still an extremely long way to go, especially in the way that different illnesses are gendered. And to think that already coming from, you know, more of a feminist perspective, the fact that 90% or something, I think it's like 85% of gynecologists, at least in Switzerland and in Australia, are men, cis men. That's already problematic. And it's also been shown through a whole lot of studies that the external perception of a woman in pain versus a man in pain are very, very different, as well as it's like women are already pigeonholed as being hysterical when it comes to being open about their struggles health-wise. So when you're already considering that, and then you put it into perspective where you're talking also about trans people or non-binary people who are suffering from the same thing, they're even more kind of devalued and more marginalized and left out of a conversation that, yeah, is really important, but needs that space for intersectionality and for understanding. And again, just stepping away from this one size fits all narrative, which sadly also exists within the spiritual and self-development scene too.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
Do you feel you have something to contribute there as well, Sami?
I guess, you know, maybe touching a bit more on the spiritual community and how it does gaslight people, and that whole law of attraction thing, like you've created this for yourself, blah, blah, blah. And it's almost like a hand brushing. Hands are brushed in your direction. And I guess I'd like to mention paradox a bit more, and about how the nature of the universe really is about paradox, the macro, the micro. I guess that goes back to what I said in the beginning about leaning into our brokenness to find our wholeness. There's, of course, like we cannot deny the fact that our health journeys have shaped us and brought us to these beautiful places where we feel we have something to share and something to bring to certain spaces for people. There's actually a Vedic goddess called, let me get this right, Akhilandeshwari. She is a crocodile goddess. Well, she rides upon a crocodile. Who, you guys heard of her?
Egyptian goddess, yeah?
Yeah, it's a Hindu Vedic goddess. She's, her name pertains to being never not broken. And she represents that paradox of being broken to find our wholeness, and the kind of paths that we take where, you know, we have these fears, we have these primal fears, but it's a spiritual, there's a spiritual side within itself to be, you know, in our darkest moments and then to come through to the light. We're in death and rebirth, we're in joy and sorrow all of the time. So for the sort of gaslighting of the love and light community or the law of attraction community, they're missing a lot of the conversation. And it actually does go back to puritanicalism, if I may, and that kind of martyrdom that comes along with Christianity, And if you're, if you have it hard, you're martyred and you've been blessed in some way, or it's there's some kind of, I guess the antithesis that they're trying to create feeds back into an older narrative that is destructive. So this goddess, I guess, is just someone that I wanted to mention as something that through spiritual practices that are a lot longer than Christianity or law of attraction or anything like that. This is something that we've recognized, that there is holiness in being unwell or being being in certain spaces that may be devalued or may be considered. I try not to use too much negative gearing, but that sense that you're unwell and you brought it upon yourself and it's a negative thing. It's not. You didn't bring it on yourself. This is a journey that you are learning to live with, and it's part of a greater conversation that we're all having with each other rather than just one person experiencing something.
Yeah, definitely hearing that. And that's, again, like, it is a big, as someone that is a practitioner of, a spiritual modality, and some of these principles, I believe myself, is, it is very, it's a belief that you have to be very careful with. And I'm very curious for all three of you, as spiritual beings, and that use spiritual practices as well, and are quite open-minded and explore all different kinds of philosophy and belief systems, where certain beliefs like you've manifested this yourself, or the law of attraction, or even things like past life regression and et cetera, all these different things, how much that plays on your mental health.
Oof. Now, not so much, but in the thick of it, for me, that was really difficult. I mean, I went through the spiral now 2.5 years ago, and that journey was really transformational. And it also, when I reached level 7, I realized I wanted to be a spiral practitioner as well, but not because the experience had been like really, really positive. It was very transcendental and it was amazing, but I just realized through the process that practitioner themselves just wasn't equipped to deal with somebody who had my lived experience. And it was nothing against them. They were amazing. I know they tried their best with the tools that they had, but it was really, really hard to see things framed in that way, because there was so much about personal responsibility, and that is absolutely a piece that needs to be discussed, and also shadow work, etc. For me, I also had to face my own shadow, in terms of realizing that a part of me really liked the attention that I got sometimes when I was that sick, and a part of me was really scared to let that go and decide to start to heal. I had become attached to this label of being the sick girl or being the sick woman who needed help. And that was something that I also attributed to my childhood trauma and different wounding, and facing that was really difficult, but also really ultimately positive and necessary. But it was just like, I guess this mindset stuff. I mean, also learning a lot about, in my spiral practitioner training, learning about, just the archetype of the victim and victim consciousness. I had a couple of really rough experiences in my training in which I was talking about my journey. And this was post-surgery where I was healing and feeling quite good. And I was just told that I was being a victim, that I was stuck in my victim consciousness because I was talking about my lived experience. And that was quite a mindfuck. That was really, really difficult, because a lot of people that were surrounding me and people that I was supposed to be being led by were saying this stuff that just really didn't resonate with me. I think we have to allow people to also just speak their truths and meet them where they're at, and accept that we're all different and that our experiences are all different. you know, and I think that is kind of what's fundamental and necessary and often missing, you know. It's like being told that when I was in such excruciating amounts of pain that I needed to have ketamine infusions just to survive and get through the day-to-days, that if I closed my eyes and did mindfulness practices and breathed into the pain, that I would then be able to deal with the pain, was something that made me feel so bad about myself, because I wasn't able to deal with the pain. I could just feel it more. Whereas like I started to realize that if I reframed that for myself and viewed it as just giving myself the space to feel the pain, that my causal body and my spiritual body and my energetic bodies were able to expand enough for me to then be able to hold the pain, was a lot more useful than being told that it would go away. So it's just like, yeah, learning through trial and error, which is, I guess, what you were saying as well before, Julia, of like the experience that you went through with the different modalities that you learnt and what worked for you, and then going ahead and studying them further and realizing that, yeah, sorry to harp on about this, but there is no one size fits all solution.
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, you need to see what works for you.
Thank you, Pia. Oh my goodness. Like, this is huge. I'm gonna answer this in a like a different way. First, kind of touching on what you said, I feel like, you know, it's interesting. I feel like when I'm uncomfortable with someone else's suffering, I'm also not able, you know, I'm more likely to try to tell them what to do, to be like, stop suffering, right? And I think that's what's happening here. You know, it's no different than crying in front of a friend who's like, I can't watch you cry, and they go to the other room. It's kind of what that feels like. And you know, I think I want to add, like, I even pulled up some studies last night, just because I want to bring in that there is science to some of what we're talking about. And I remember when I was in high school, I did a higher level chemistry class, and I'll never forget this because it really stuck in my mind. We were talking about food coloring, and my science teacher was a previous scientist at Colgate. She helped make toothpaste for Colgate. And so she was just really well versed in a lot of modern science and what was happening. And I'll never forget this. We're talking about food coloring because we were playing with different things. And she said, make sure you never eat red food coloring. And we were all like, why? And she was like, because there's links to food coloring with cancer. And I think that was the first introduction to, you know, for me to see what's also not only happening person to person level, but behind the scenes, there is research studies. There are things coming out about some of the causes and things that are coming up in our food system, in the toxins that we use in our clothes, in all these other things. Like, and I wanted to bring this study here because I think it's so important in our medical understanding of disease. And there's also the emotional side, which I feel is also really helpful for my personal healing. But then even some things that are not spoken about are things like food dyes and what's in our food system that's also affecting our genes and their genetic expression at a gene level. And it was Harvard, you know, I can't pronounce his name correctly, but Jing X Kang. So, you know, Harvard Medical School, Boston, Massachusetts, USA. And, you know, they're saying here, our understanding of genetics has progressed in leaps and bounds over the past decades, the apex of which was the completion of the Human Genome Project in 2004. Genetics play an integral role in every type of disease, whether the relationship is one of inheritance or the product of gene-environment interactions. This greater understanding of genetics has provided insight into the etiology of many diseases, as well as the types of interventions. And, you know, they're essentially saying that with chronic illness, it depends kind of what is in our environment, also our genetics, that allows the gene expression to happen. So it's not just you called it in, or it's not, you know, someone's giving it to you, but it's also a variety of factors, what we're eating, you know, our lifestyles, different things that is contributing to our body. It's kind of like if every gene was an artist and every artist wanted to express themselves in a new way. For me, it might show up as chronic pain. For Pia, it might show up differently, but everyone's bodies are so unique. And so that kind of contributes also to, there's no one size fits all, but like, you know, how come these studies aren't also talked about more in the mainstream? Why can't we bring some of this knowledge and this research into what's practiced with our doctors, into certain things here? So I've gone to great lengths to seek out nutrition solutions, for example, that will help remove toxins from my body, that will help my body deal with stress in a new way, that will help my body deal with the emotional level of what things are going on here. I've sought out so many things, but you know, and I can't pinpoint as to this day, I can't say why. And I think even in the mental health arena, there's this big focus on why is this happening to me? And that was something that I asked myself so many times. It's like, you know, why is it that I continue to binge eat when I've done all these diets and stuff like that? And I think that obsession with why was actually never really answered. But the answer in hindsight, you know, was that, you know, it kind of focusing on the why didn't allow me to go on the journey of the how. But also, yeah, does that kind of play into that here?
Yeah, of course. That's a massive unraveling around mental health, and actually where these pieces are coming from to actually play into why this is affecting each of you in its own different ways, because the system is not set up to actually explain and support the way to hold that healthiness, not only for your mental but for your body in so many different ways. So thank you bringing that piece in as well, like nutrients and health in ways that are beyond what is going on inside, but actually what you're putting in there to contribute to that. Yeah, that's a big thing.
There's actually a word for that too, Julia. It's epigenetics. And it's the study of how, you know, they're doing more and more studies on that, like you said, all the time. It's really exciting research because it does back up what naturopaths and Eastern medicine practitioners have been saying for so long, is that the body is a whole organism, the mind, the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, and it talks to each other on a genetic level. And so we express as we go genetically, whatever we're feeding ourselves, food, media, words, you know, the people we hang around, it all has a part to play in that genetic expression. And then how we're healing, how we're replicating ourselves, which is exciting because it means anything is possible. You can replicate and express yourself as someone different in a year's time, you know, or a day's time. So how cool is that?
So cool. It is so epic. I just want to quickly acknowledge Julia. I know you said you possibly have to go at this time. How are you feeling right now?
We can do a little longer.
All right, let's do longer. I like longer. I'm still very curious. Is there anything else you'd like to share on that, Sam, around how that's played on your mental health across this? I guess are we going to call this like a dogma of like spiritual dogma around, law of attraction, around all these different spiritual beliefs?
I guess by the time I got to that point, nothing was really going to affect me very much. I think I went through all my mental health journeying with, you know, the extreme issues that I experienced as a child with the medical industry. You know, it's being a child means you attract kind of people that are there in positions of power to, I guess, prey on you. I ended up basically suicidal at the age of 8. Like I was so depressed. I was so very also the medication had a lot to do with that. You know, there was just so much going on. So I think by the time I was 13 and I was getting into spirituality and reading books on mythology and witchcraft and paganism, and then when I was older, I started to hear about the law of attraction. I kind of was already on my path or on my focus of how I understood myself and my mind and my body and how that played together. And I liked what you said, Julia, about, you know, always sort of asking yourself, why? Like, why did this happen? And I think the why that I was always asking myself was, why can I not just be a person with rheumatoid arthritis that needs, especially as a child, that needs my health taken care of in a very, you know, particular way. Not to have it bombarded with drugs and be decimated completely. So that was my why. And I think by the time I had complete control over my health journey at 15, I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to explore every single avenue that I can, which, you know, we've mentioned as well, like, try everything. Just try everything that you can, because no one size fits all, and you might need a different blend of things to the next person. I'm really excited that so many, well, quite a few doctors I've met as I've gotten older are kind of on that wavelengths too. Like, I'm sorry that you, Paisley, were kind of experiencing the opposite of that. Like, there's still that old boys club to mainstream medicine. And they don't want to know. They don't want to know about anyone else coming into their turf. But it is, I see a slight change. What I'd really like to see is mainstream medicine and alternative medicine working as singular entities, but together. That way, the potency of it isn't diluted. And there's a respect that comes together for the patient, you know, like the patient's journey should be center, not a practitioner's ego.
Yeah. And I am hearing, you know, like here and there, very rarely, but that these places are happening, you know, that there's medical centers where there's practitioners that are of different philosophies, different medicines of from, Eastern, Western, mainstream, alternative, you know, ways of presenting and learning and healing. I'm loving that you just here and there, you know, hear someone say, oh yeah, I've seen this lady, you know, that is actually offering. I'm like, oh, sick. Okay, it's happening. It's around.
It exists here, actually. Like in German, in German, Austrian, Swiss medicine, it's really normalized to have homeopaths and naturopaths just be part of the team. And it's especially, actually, I mean, like, when I gave birth, it was, would you like an epidural and some hard drugs, or would you like some essential oils and some stones? You know, like, it was actually a very kind of nice balanced thing. But that being said, it doesn't exist in every realm and facet and discipline of medicine. You know, I think it's something that we start to see a lot more of, and something that is starting to gain a little bit more, I guess, like, respect. But it is, it's something that I really hope for the future is just normalized.
Yes.
You know, why can't these things complement each other as opposed to be on opposite sides of the spectrum and be almost ridiculed in both ways? You know, sometimes it's like, oh my God, you got surgery. What's wrong with you? How come you didn't heal yourself? And then on the other side, it's, you know, oh my God, you believe in chakras. You know, it's just like this very like diametrically opposed system that is really limiting.
Very reductive, yes.
I guess I'm curious, and this could possibly come off as quite a privileged question for me to ask, is with that sort of mindset that I see a lot of you, that all three of you have, is that you can see both sides, right? And I'm curious to hear, as spiritual people that practice empathy, people that are having these inclusive conversations that maybe not including chronic illness and disability, or people that are using these frames of like manifestation or law of attraction or past life regression, whatever it is, that how you're balancing, if this is what's happening, that like, fuck, I understand this ignorance, but also like that fire of being like, shit needs to change. I'm curious to hear that balance, if there is a balance, or if it's one side or the other for you around wanting change, but also understanding some people are quite ignorant and they just not had these conversations that we're having right now.
I think you're bang on. I think it's ignorance that it stems from, because I for myself have an understanding of past lives that have influenced maybe the journey I'm on in this life, genetically, like ancestral trauma informing that. And I definitely know that I chose this life. Like, thank you very much. Yes, I did come here like empowered with this journey ahead of me, but I don't want anyone else to like be judging about how I should be going about that, So it comes back to that 50-50, like it's the same, but I think it's really great the more that we can have these discussions. And I think that for people who are spiritual, maybe they just don't realize, I'd like to think they don't realize they're doing that kind of harm. And I think if it's pointed out to them that it's more reductive, it's more harmful, you're actually projecting shame. And it says a lot more about them and the journey that they're on. Maybe that would encourage them to sort of, sit back and open up to it in a different way. And, we keep talking about shadow, and then that's another kind of shadow that comes up. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
And I, none of us are perfect. Like,
no.
It's so easy to
I, for one, am not.
Yeah.
I think Sam answered that one just perfectly. And, I'm on the vibe of, things need to change, but I'm not here to really change people's opinions per se, but I am here to demonstrate through the people that I work with that they can also heal from things that I struggled with. So, in my practice, I include binge eating clients all the way up to people who are struggling with some chronic illness. I had a girl with IBS come to me recently and just, again, frustrated with what she was seeing so far. And I think that's the change that I'm more focused on, is like, let's get people healed. Like, let's get more people talking about this. Let's bring our knowledge into the mainstream. And it is happening, like you're saying. So
yeah, I resonate with that a lot. Like the idea of people discovering the power that they already have through, I guess, working with me or working with other people, but then also just, this conversation we're having now, Paisley, that you facilitated is also a step in that direction. Or, responding to things that I see on the internet, like when you post it, is just like opening up conversations with people that, are open to them, basically. I think sometimes it can be really hard because you are met with a lot of dogma, and it's kind of like speaking to a brick wall, and it just becomes really tiring. And again, when it comes to, I guess, the more activism side of things, it should never really be the onus on the person that's marginalized to be educating the person who is more privileged. That's not how it should be. But I think that, by being open and honest and having conversations and sharing about one's experience, it can also just be really educational in a way that isn't necessarily burdensome for the person that's struggling with whatever it might be. So I think just, again, making the space for these conversations to happen, and making the space for them to happen without too much othering, I think is really helpful too, because it's also never nice to feel like you're a token in some sort of way, It's like, I think, Sami, you posted the other day like some meme about please don't tell like disabled or chronically ill people like that they're so strong and amazing and they're doing it. Like, it's just really infantilizing and patronizing. And it's like, I'm living my life, and it's not always easy in the way that it might be for you, but like, I'm an adult, and I think that is also part of what needs to be acknowledged when these conversations are had as well, when you're having them with adults. But
yes. I recently did a podcast with Nadine and Jamaz, who are two Australian artists, on tokenism, as they have their different tokens like queerness and of color. And we sort of unpacked a lot of that, and that's definitely one I want to question around my own language and my own motives to, I guess, have a bit of an unpack around. Is when I was talking to you, Pia, was like, hey, and I was like, fuck, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I'm just gonna have to say it, and if I'm wrong, I'm gonna have to learn. Is like, hey, I would love to have the perspective of someone who is also physically disabled. And I was like, fuck, am I tokenizing? Is it right to just, go, oh, I need to, am I looking like I'm trying to reach a quota, whatever? I'm curious to hear, around that, like using these different languages and how that resonates, and maybe any kind of education for someone that wants to continue to utilize their platform like I am now to continue these conversations, to making sure your intention is a big part of it, but also, yes, language is important. So I'm curious if there's any lessons that maybe could be passed on now around that.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think people are, I think everyone's trying their best when it comes to using language and being inclusive, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that, like, I, as a physically disabled person who, I don't feel tokenized, or when someone comes at me with a genuine interest and a genuine, concern or something like that, you can feel that. So I think it's, something you feel into rather than what the actual words are for myself, because I understand not everyone's going to know the right words, and I'm not hung up on that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, for me, I'm not physically disabled in that way. I do have a more like invisible illness, and I think, at least personally, just let's not try and sugarcoat things. It's just like saying special needs or differently abled, or these types of words are just like, I don't think they're created by actual disabled people. It's just like, I think for me, like the fundamental rule is always like, if you're unsure, ask. Again, if you're coming from a place of like genuine inquiry and curiosity, and it's not coming from a place of, being patronizing or infantilizing, then I think that is always really powerful. And like you said, Sami, it's something that can be felt. There's an energy behind the words, or behind the question. And that's what matters, because being part of, a marginalized group, like, you just don't feel seen a lot of the time. So having someone genuinely ask you a question out of, like, from a place of interest is also sometimes really impactful and can be really huge. And I think, I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of people would be really happy to answer honestly.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really interesting, actually. I wasn't even prepared for this conversation, but I find it so funny that I'm co-teaching a course right now on language technologies to help us just, not only lead in a different way, but also to find mutual understanding. And, it's geared towards coaches and stuff like that. And one thing that the executive coach that is co-teaching it with me, he's big on like the background of obviousness. So no different than when a couple gets together and they're trying to solve a problem. One person sees something as totally obvious and the other person doesn't see that same thing as totally obvious. So two people might come to the same situation and have their own background of obviousness on what they see as obvious. And already I think having that invisible understanding, even the expectation of, you know, you should tell me when something's wrong, that's a background of obviousness for one person, but for someone who might have grown up culturally where speaking their truth wasn't actually celebrated, they might not feel comfortable or even know what the fuck their truth is. So I don't know, right? Everyone's so different. But then from knowing that, from that understanding, then you know, kind of rather than talking about like problems, because problems, even in the brain, like cyclically, when you talk about problems, they're kind of more referencing the past and going in circles. But when you ask a vision question, which is a different kind of question, which is how do you see I can meet this need for you? It takes the mind into like a different space. It takes it into where you can visualize and come up with solutions together, as opposed to referencing the past and previous hurts for that thing. So I just find it interesting that I'm studying this at this moment. Asking for
You were meant to be here.
Yeah.
You're meant to be here.
Yeah.
I'm glad there wasn't too much of a like, this is what we're going to talk about, because yeah, I think it's important that we left the mystery open. See, it feels very right now to actually to give the platform, and just I would love anything that all three of you are offering, and also any books, documentaries, kind of media that you feel like anyone that wants to continue to learn more. But yeah, also, yeah, any offerings that you do have that can continue this conversation, or that you might just have completely separate to this. I would love for each of you to share that. Instagram, programs, whatever it is, please.
Who's going to go first? That's funny. Well, my website is theholisticbranch.com. It's very neglected. I've barely uploaded anything the past year. I've been very sidetracked. But if you go there, you'll find an invitation to join up to my newsletter list. And I have on there an ebook about empowering your adrenal glands, which I wrote last year for everyone that was feeling burnt out and overwhelmed. So if that's something that interests you, please take up that offering. I'd be honored, and I'd love to know what you think of it as well. On Instagram, I'm Sambi Lou, or just search Samantha Mant and you'll find me.
Thank you. Yeah, all of the also for anyone that's listening, all this will be in the information of the podcast on all the different platforms. But yes, please continue with sharing for each of you.
All right. Well, I feel like it's fitting. So I have a website that I have not yet officially launched, but it is done. So I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to just put it out there and say, hey,
yes, get it out
there. So my website is www.piasimona.com. So that's just my name. I am a spiral practitioner. I'm also a somatic release and Shakti rising, which is another modality practitioner. I have spiral on offer, some one-on-one empowerment sessions, spiral packages as well, and also just coaching packages. But I'm also on the verge of launching kind of a movement called Chronically Empowered, which I really, really want to get off the ground soon, where I just want to invite people who identify with having a chronic illness or a disability to essentially, just share their stories, share their experiences, and look at it from a lens of like, well, what can we do that we've always been able to do, that we've been scared of, and how can we show ourselves that we actually are whole people and we always have been. So yeah, if you're interested in any of that, check it out or reach out to me, and yeah, I'm always happy to have a chat.
Yeah,
I will be there with bells on, my darling.
Yes, thank you.
So good. Yes, okay, my full name, Pia Simone, and thank you so much for sharing the stage with me, everyone. You guys are incredible. You can go to my website, juliasimone.ca. You know, I help people with binge eating recovery, with addiction recovery, but also on the physical side through nutrition solutions as well, and then managing chronic pain through for movement and mobility techniques. So that is me. And, I'm thinking about also helpful resources along the way. I don't know if you guys have heard of Dr. Gabor Mate, but he had on addiction in the realm of hungry ghosts. And then he also has this very unknown book. The name is kind of creeping me right now, but it's on stress and this hidden trifecta of research of how chronic illness and stress are connected, and also touches on people's stories as part of that. And that was really interesting because he would meet someone and he would interview their whole life story, and they would talk about when they were young, they were abused, or, they experienced certain things, and just the more in-depth layers of healing that we would like a lot of our, people practicing in the medical field to maybe understand, is that was an amazing book to bring and shed light to the hidden aspects of what might be happening in a person's life with chronic illness.
Epic. Yeah, please, if you find that, link it to me. I would love to share it alongside these when this comes out.
That just made me think about also a book which I don't know if you're all familiar with. It's pretty famous. It's The Body Remembers, which is a book that really changed my life as well. It's about how the body stores trauma and how then that manifests in different ways, and how that can be expressed physically. And that's a really interesting read. It's quite a heavy read, so trigger warning, because it goes into a lot of trauma, but that's something that I would highly recommend, just to understand more so that mind, body, spirit connection, as opposed to just looking there. And then for anybody that has endometriosis that might be listening, Do You Endo and Know Your Endo are both really great resources by a woman who's actually also a nutritionist, who really looks at the underlying kind of themes and effects that can affect endometriosis in and of itself, and looking at it from a nutritional point of view, but also yoga and different daily practices that can also be really helpful.
Awesome.
Pia, is that Body Remembers book the same book that might be called The Body Knows the Score, or is that a different book?
Oh, it might be a different one. The Body Knows the Score is also a really good book.
Okay, so they are two different books. Cool, because I was
The Body Remembers. It's different. Yeah.
I was like, is that the same book I'm thinking of?
No, that's actually another really good one. No,
Okay.
that's another
more
really
resources.
Good one. Yeah.
More resources. Great.
That's another fantastic book. That's also a very heavy read. So there's two books for you guys.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, we're going to continue after this, but just goodbye, everyone that's listening. Thank you, you three, for joining us and sharing so beautifully. This is the first podcast where I've teared up multiple times, so I'm really appreciative of you really being vulnerable and sharing your stories. I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you. This has been wild. It's been so good.
It's been beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for sharing so openly and vulnerably. And thanks so much, Paisley, for holding the space and for being open to discuss hard things. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's foursome I've ever had.
Same.
Yes. Yes.
There. She followed him and soon found herself falling a very deep hole into a strange place called Curious Conversation. Curious Conversation. Nowadays, there are still girls and boys whose curiosity leads them to strange